Hello and welcome to the Glasgow Motorway Archive podcast. I'm John Hassel.
And I'm Stuart Beard.
How are you, Stuart?
I'm fine as always, John. How are things with you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I'm always happy when I'm sitting here in this chair talking about the things we love.
It's been a quick month since the last podcast.
Yes, it really has.
The old GGTS subject seemed to go down quite well.
It did.
We've had a couple of good podcasts now with the potholes and the GGTS. So.
Let's talk about what we're going to talk about this month, okay?
Mm-hmm.
On this episode.
Yes.
So, a certain bridge, it turns 85.
It does indeed.
And that is the Kincardine Bridge.
Yes.
We've never spoken about the Kincardine Bridge before.
No, we haven't really spoken about anything in central Scotland before.
Not really.
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that's in Glasgow, but
No.
it's not too far away from Glasgow.
No, it's just
to
at
be
the
honest
edge of the motorway box.
So we thought it's a good time because it's his 85th, and you've done a lot of research into this.
Yes.
And pulled things together from various different people and stuff like that. So I'm really kind of handing a lot of this to you, Stuart.
Yeah.
As I do my usual cross-examining, so it won't just be a long monologue from you.
Lots of talking from me again, 2 months in a row. That's
don't worry, I've got my one lined up next month.
Yes, good. Anyway, 85 isn't normally an anniversary that you would think was important, but given it was Kincardine Bridge and it was pointed out to us that it was coming up, I thought, well, you know what, why not? Because, as you say, we've never discussed it.
We haven't.
So, and it's an interesting bridge. I mean, in fairness, you and I actually know Kincardine Bridge quite well.
Yes.
Because we've had some professional involvement in it over the years. And for a long time, we visited it quite regularly.
Yeah, it was every 2 weeks.
Something like that, yep.
That we were out there. And I do remember, even in the height of summer, I always found it quite a cold place.
Cold, windy, dreich.
To walk it and go around its various components. But about the bridge itself, it was lovely. It was different.
Yeah, it's an interesting bridge, very much of the old school style of bridges. Art Deco style. Mm-hmm. It's pretty iconic. It's A-listed. Mm-hmm. Has been since 2005, so that gives an indication of its importance. Some say it's a monument to Scottish engineering. Yeah, I'd say that's a fair point.
Yeah,
it is. And although you and I are familiar with the bridge as it is today, actually we didn't really know a lot about its history other than the basics. Yeah. So it's been interesting to go away and research it and do a bit of digging and get a better understanding of how it came to be, how it was built, and how it's performed over the years. Mm-hmm. First of all, there's a couple of thank yous that really need to get out there. So Dave Pritchard, who's a colleague of ours, supplied us with a technical paper that was released the year after the bridge opened. That contained a lot of very useful information on the planning and the history.
Filled in quite a few gaps.
Yes. And also to Mrs. June Jack, who got in touch following our appeal on social media for information about the bridge. Turns out Mrs. Jack's grandfather was actually the first bridge master, Mr. James Boyd, and there were some family members had been at the opening of the bridge, and she sent over some photographs of these people at the actual opening.
This sounds terrific. Yeah. I know I've turned up here as the talent for the podcast, so to speak. I've not seen these photos yet, so I'm looking forward to seeing them.
You'll see them, and not only that, but Mr. Boyd actually was granted a British Empire Medal.
Oh, okay.
And he was given that in the control room of the bridge. So
fantastic. There you go. We walked in amongst that history, so to speak,
yes.
in that control room.
And I think he ended up working in that role for a good few years, over a couple of decades. And interestingly, there were actually not as many bridge masters as you might think, as I'll cover as we go through.
Okay.
Okay. So if I was to say to you, John, what the most interesting feature of the Kincardine Bridge is, what would you say it was?
Probably the fact that it could swing open.
Exactly. It's a swing bridge.
Yes, but not many people think or know of that. We know that through our work and through looking into these kind of things, but it might not be the thing that most people think of. Yeah.
So the last time the bridge opened was in January 1988.
Wow.
That's how long it's been. So you're right. To most people, it's not, or it has never been a swing bridge. No. So people may not be aware.
Most people associate with the long way round. They've got to go if there was a problem at Forth.
Exactly. So that's probably its most interesting feature. Mm-hmm. At that time, there was a lot of shipping on all the rivers in Scotland, as we've mentioned, with the Clyde and others before. So any bridge had to allow for the continuation of that. Mm-hmm. And that's why they ultimately chose a swing bridge. But actually delving into the history of how the bridge came about, if you take yourself back to the 1920s, and as we've mentioned plenty of times in this podcast, at that time traffic growth was quite high. particularly in the towns and cities. And at that time, you had 3 options for crossing the River Forth by car.
Okay.
Because obviously by that time you had the Forth rail bridge.
Yes.
So you could cross by rail at Queensferry.
Yeah.
Okay. If you wanted to cross by car or by van or by bus or whatever, you either could do that by the old ferries that operated between North and South Queensferry.
Yep.
You could do it as a passenger ferry around the Kincardine area. There was a vehicle service around about Alloa. And then from there, the only option you had was Stirling Bridge on the A9 in Stirling.
Even an even
centre.
Longer way round.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was estimated that for traffic that was looking to travel up the east coast, that was coming from the south, if there was an issue and the ferries were off, they had a potential 50-mile diversion to get to a fixed crossing at Stirling. Okay, so not an ideal scenario. They were finding with the growth in traffic that Stirling was starting to become quite clogged up. And they knew that a significant proportion of this traffic was not traffic heading north to Inverness or Perth, say, but actually was heading northeastwards.
Okay.
So through central Scotland.
So maybe to parts of like Fife or like Tayside and other places
and
like
St
that.
Andrews and places like that in the northeast corner.
Yeah.
So they realised, okay, we have to do something here. And they started investigating the options for a bridge in the sort of a mid to late 1920s. So initially, they considered a crossing at Alloa. But it was kind of pointed out by some that Kincardine offered better options because it was on the road network. It was a better location in the road network for traffic.
For the approach roads and everything like that. Because that's also an extra cost and a challenge with building any crossing is your approach roads and getting to it.
Exactly. So they actually, initially the councils, Clackmannan Council in particular, they brought in Mott, Hay and Anderson, the consultant who were involved in the Forth Road Bridge. They actually brought them in to do a study on the feasibility of a crossing at Alloa. Things didn't really move forward at all. There was some initial concerns as well that perhaps at Kincardine the ground conditions weren't favourable. But eventually, by 1930, all the councils banded together and decided to have a joint report commissioned. Okay. And the two consultants, so Mott, Hay and Anderson, who were already involved, plus Alexander Gibb and Partners, they were brought in to work together to come up with a report that ultimately made a recommendation on a site. In the interim period, they had actually discovered that boreholes had been done in the Kincardine area as part of a potential railway tunnel. So it turned out a lot of ground conditions in the area weren't as bad as some had feared. There was some rock on the north side of the river, and even in the south side, rock was fairly deep, but it wasn't so bad that they couldn't contemplate the construction of a bridge there. So ultimately, when all these things were put together in June 1930, there was a meeting with the Ministry of Transport and the various counties and some of the borough councils. They all came together and looked at this report, and it was demonstrated by the August that basically the Kincardine option offered the greatest benefits and would actually be cheaper to construct, even though it was wider potentially than the Alloa option. But because of the strategic nature of the road, it was felt that Kincardine was definitely the way to go. And in fairness to Clackmannanshire Council, they agreed and they dropped their plans for an Alloa crossing in favour of Kincardine because it was shown that they would benefit from that as well.
That's interesting you say that, with the Concordant Bridge, it was longer at Kincardine than it would have been at Alloa. And yet there was a kind of a less cost involved in that. Yeah. And that's really down to those conditions.
Yeah, basically, yes, exactly. Now, one of the constraints, as I mentioned earlier, was that they had to allow shipping to continue. Grain and fuel and various other things were brought into Alloa. This
is like a theme, with bridges of that era. There was a lot of this shipping quite far up.
Exactly. So they knew they had to allow for that, and they were willing to compromise and say that ships of up to 2,000 tonnes would be allowed to continue upstream. So that as they were putting any proposals together, basically, that had to be allowed for. So bridges over any major rivers require parliamentary approval, as you know, when there's shipping involved and other things. So they had to have a parliamentary hearing, and that was held in the spring of 1931. And they sat for a few weeks to consider the various proposals. Now, in the interim period between the joint report being prepared and them getting to this stage, Alexander Gibbon Partners had actually prepared some designs for the bridge. So they knew by this stage what they wanted it to look like. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they went forward to the parliamentary hearing with a proposal for a bridge that was just under 2,700 feet long. Mm-hmm. Okay, and it was going to have a swing span rather than a lift, because they did consider the option of a lifting bridge. Yes. Like Tower Bridge in London, for example, or the Bascule Bridge in Shannon and Renfrew, one like that, but it would actually lift. But it was demonstrated that actually it would be much cheaper to come up with a swing bridge.
So it was cost that came down to.
Yeah. Not only that, but that would actually create two separate openings in the channel where ships could proceed upstream or downstream. So if your ships went to go both ways, you could have them going down either side of the swing span and clearly.
Yes, because it swings in the middle. I see what you say here. Rather than the whole thing swinging to one side, it swung in the middle, and it created almost like a central reservation.
Exactly.
That ships could use to pass either side.
Yeah, exactly. So initially the proposal was they were going to allow two openings of 100 feet wide in the river, but after some negotiations with the various river authorities, that was increased to 150 feet. Headroom of 30 feet was initially allowed for. That was later increased to 40 feet, so it was a bit higher. So that's if the bridge is closed and you're going through. So some smaller boats can obviously go through any time. The approach roads were basically non-existent. So Kincardine as a town was there, but on the south side there really wasn't anything. So there was a couple of sets of approach roads were going to be required, 2,200 yards on the south side and 500 yards on the north. They also realised that Kincardine's very narrow town centre streets wouldn't be able to cope with the traffic, and therefore a 700-yard long bypass to the north of the town was built as well. That still exists. Yeah. I think is it Ferrygate? I think that road is called. That's on the main Dunfermline to Alloa road, the A977 it is by that point around the north of the town. Because of course there was further changes made.
I think that's later. Had improvements over the years. Yeah, they've done things to that.
So there's been some things changed. As you say.
It's kind of crucial to state that that is distinct from what is the Kincardine bypass that you have now, which is that 2+1 thing that of course came much later.
Yes, and we'll mention that as well.
Sure.
At the end. So, all the agreements were in place. They were pretty clear on what the design was going to be. The need for the bridge was justified. The Ministry of Transport actually offered to fund 85% of the cost initially, although they later cut that to 75% because of the national economic situation.
Well, this was an interwar period, wasn't it? So that kind of makes sense.
Exactly. It should be said as well, there were a number of fairly well-known landowners and the like who were pretty keen to move this forward, various earls and lords in the area, some of whom were involved in the local councils as well. Some of them were real backers of the scheme and really pushed for its construction and probably helped it along much more quickly than it might have been otherwise.
It always helps when you have local lobbyists.
Exactly, yeah. So that all went ahead fairly quickly. So basically the bridge ended up approved in the summer of 1931 and the tenders were issued in December of that year. Of the 12 prices returned, the Cleveland Bridge and Engineering Company was the lowest, with a combined tender of £238,609.
That's really cheap. Someone could sell their house and build a bridge for that.
A drop in the ocean, exactly.
But then again, we have inflation, don't we?
Yes. So construction was initially expected to start shortly afterwards, but the national economic situation delayed it slightly, and it was September 1933 before work actually was approved finally, with works then starting on site that December. Now, the final project cost actually ended up $327,000. That includes the various approach roads. So that cost of $238,000, that was only for the bridge.
The bridge. I was going to say that's quite an overspend on there. But yeah.
No. Okay. So I think when we put that through the inflation calculator, the total cost works out at like £24 million today. So it's not too bad at all. That's still quite low for a bridge of that type. I think you would struggle to build a swing bridge for that price.
No,
today.
I think something that I know you often use this inflation calculator just to roll against the figures, but any major projects that are done now have far much more money spent on the consultation phases with these kind of things that would traditionally may have happened.
And the environmental factors working in that marine environment or semi-marine environment with migrating birds and various other things.
Sites of special scientific interest.
There would be a lot of environmental mitigation that would probably be required now that would obviously put that up as well. Any questions at this stage You were clear on why the bridge is there, and
yeah, I mean, I do. I think in some ways it's quite self-explanatory with these things because you want to get across the water, you still need to allow shipping. You've kind of summarising what you said. The choice to have it at Kincardine seemed to be the best.
Yeah,
the ground conditions allowed it.
Exactly.
Yes, there were some challenges with putting these approach roads in and stuff like that. Although, I mean, we crossing the Forth. So it is. I mean, it wasn't for many years, of course, until another bridge came along.
Yeah.
So still, if there wasn't the crossings that we have over at Forth and stuff, it would still be a very long way round if we look at it now through that perspective. But no, at the time, I think you've justified that.
Well, put it this way: even before they started building it, they knew that when it was complete, it was going to be the longest road bridge in Scotland.
Yeah.
This was.
Yeah, think of that.
This was a large project.
Of most of our major structures and things like that have come in the kind of 60s and 70s and
mostly the post-war era. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was a big project. There was a lot of desire to get it done. There was a lot of interest in it, and the people round about. As we've said on other projects, there was a lot of pride.
Yes.
In the project. People bought into it. They really saw the benefit in it, particularly people
in the
both
area
sides of the river
as well. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, who were keen to be able to get across much more easily. I should have said as well, actually, that we mentioned the connection to the roads. We had the main road in the north, as we mentioned, in Dunfermline to Alloa Road, and in the south we actually had the Grangemouth, so the Edinburgh Grangemouth Stirling Road, which is up through Skinflats, just off the M876.
Yep.
In that Falkirk, it's sort of a north-east of Falkirk. Still all there. The A905, I think it is. In fact, when I was talking to Duncan McKnight about this, and he mentioned that actually prior to the construction of the motorways and things, a lot of that road was improved as well because the approaches to the bridge were becoming quite busy. So there's part of the A905.
Because there was back then there was no M9.
Yeah.
There was no M876.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you were having to travel up through Falkirk and the like to get there. So there was a bit of duelling went on in the 40s. Or was planned in the 40s. I think he said it was ultimately early 50s that it was finished. So there were some proposals there. Okay, so a wee bit of information on the design of the bridge. Now, most people will be familiar with the fact that it has steel girders because they're driving over it and they're driving through it. Because it's one of these. It's a Warren Truss. You're driving through the middle of it. Yep. So you'll be very aware of that. A lot of people might not know that it has concrete elements as well. If no one's been underneath before, it has reinforced concrete piers in the river and a steel girders as a deck.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Yeah,
putting steel in the water is sometimes not a good idea.
No,
so
it certainly isn't.
Of course,
especially when it's salty water. So it's a sort of composite bridge in that sense. It's a multi-span structure, as I'm sure people are aware, and there's various individual components that are part of it. Now, I'm going to do one of those things that you do, and I'm going to read out a passage from an original report.
It's not lazy, it's just giving people a tap into the original information without any embellishment. That's what I say.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the various spans of the bridge were outlined in this 1936 technical paper as follows. Now, this is from north to south. Any descriptions of the bridge were always from north to south in the technical paper. So it says there are 3 continuous spans of 62 feet 6 inches. Okay. So that's 20 odd metres. Over the LNER railway, so that's the London North Eastern Railway. Yep. And they're on a curve of 520 feet. Okay, so if you think about it, at the north end of the bridge, the road curves round to the right. Yep. And that, of course, was so that it could tie in with the new approach road that they were constructing at that end.
I know that bend. I was always walking around it,
Yep. There are then 7 steel spans, each of 100 feet, which is just about 30 metres. And they're constructed as a system of cantilevers with 50 feet girders in alternate spans. This economic and convenient method form of construction lent itself admirably to the adoption of the arched shape of girder, which is a characteristic feature of the design.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you can see that it's got an arched profile underneath. Now I'm actually quite lucky. I've been under there on a boat.
Yes, you have.
So I have actually seen it quite close up underneath.
Imagine how cold you would have been on that day.
That was June. Yeah, so I have seen it up close underneath. And you know what? We're going to be sharing some photos in the new web article that will show that detail. So worth having a look if anyone's...
I think it's also worth saying here as well, is Kincardine one of these bridges, it's different from others, that you get most of an appreciation for a bridge when you drive over it, right? Kincardine's actually a little bit different. You get more of an appreciation for Kincardine when you look at it from the side.
Yeah.
So I've always found it's far more striking and impressive to actually look at it from another angle, not a driver's angle.
And more people probably see it from the side now that Clacks Bridge is there. Yeah, because before it was very difficult.
Clacks is like the viewing platform for it.
Exactly.
In many ways, like the Queensferry Crossing is a viewing platform for the
Forford Bridge. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Then we have the steel swing span in the middle. That's 364 feet. It's a Warren Truss type, as I mentioned. It says here it's symmetrically balanced on a centre pier at midstream. So yeah, the turning mechanism and all that, it's all based in that large central pier. I believe that is pier number 11, actually. And the structure is then protected from shipping by a timber jetty, which is 470 feet long and 50 feet wide.
I remember that timber jetty.
Yes.
That's still there.
It is.
And I remember you were saying, don't ever walk on that.
Yes. It's quite old now. It's 85.
Yeah, I always found it quite old, yeah.
Yeah.
So
that timber jetty, incidentally, is constructed from Canadian Douglas fir.
Oh.
Creosoted here, being shipped into Grangemouth from Canada, Empire timber, as it's described, and brought upstream on barges to the site. Because
that's a lovely little interesting bit of information.
The jetty was actually constructed early-ish in the contract.
So I've got a question then I can put to you. I don't know if you know, the jetties were just there to protect it, or were they there for landing certain things or doing things that they weren't for?
It says in the paper that it was there to protect the centre span from being struck by a ship.
Yeah, because I was looked at and thought, they must have had some other purpose. So
you're right. It did have equipment there to allow landings of boats, whether that was for inspection purposes or whatever.
Possibly. Something incidental anyway. Yeah.
And of course, the main feature of the jetties, we're going off on a tangent here, but I don't mind, is the two old semaphore signals on either end of the twin arm semaphore signals, which would drop when it was clear for the ships to go. I think one arm would drop when they were preparing to open the bridge, and the second would drop when it was clear for the ships to go. And there was lights and various things. Now those signals are still there. So if you get a chance, walk over the bridge on the north footway. I think you get the best look at it. If I remember rightly, the one on the south side of the bridge wasn't in the best condition the last time I looked.
So what would you say? The north or like the west?
The north,
side?
Well, the north or the west footway.
Yeah, that's it.
That would be the best one to walk on to get a good look at that. Yeah. So yeah. There you go, just a wee fact there for you.
Okay.
What else do we have? Okay, so there's then 7 further spans, each of 100 feet, similar to those first set that we mentioned. And there's 9 reinforced concrete spans, each of 50 feet, with an arched underside similar to to that adopted for the steel. So when you're getting to the southern end, actually the entire bridge becomes concrete. There's no steel on that.
It's a viaduct under there. Yeah.
And you've also got the 265 feet long piled reinforced concrete viaduct as well. So yeah, that's
interesting.
That's basically the makeup.
So
of
that was
bridge.
the thing that I found when I very first went to that bridge. I was something I didn't realise about it was that approach viaduct almost from the south, and that's quite big. It's massive.
Yeah. That's actually scheduled for replacement fairly shortly. 2022, I think is.
I remember when they were in there doing all the boreholes and everything and looking for that.
Yeah, there's been some media recently about that. I think it's due for replacement next year, so stay tuned for that. Okay, the structure itself has 19 reinforced concrete supports of varying dimensions and styles. These are mostly cylindrical. Some of them sit on their own, others are interconnected with other concrete. And most of these, particularly on the north side, are founded on rock. There was piles used, of course, in the construction, as there always is with bridges as well. And the bridge deck is made up of 2 5 feet wide footways and a single 30 feet wide carriageway. So
it's a single carriageway.
Carriageway road with a couple of footways on either side. And it's edged with granite curbs. They used a light granite because it was felt that it was easier for drivers to see at night. So,
That's quite advanced at the time, wasn't it?
Almost like an edge line. It is, of course, it's rather sad, but it's difficult to see the curbs now because we have that temporary barrier is in place along the length of the bridge provide additional protection for vehicles, because the original railings certainly weren't rated to 44-ton vehicles like we see today.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why that protection's in there, if anybody has ever wondered. 2 concrete portals mark the extent of the swing span, and these include sliding gates, each weighing 4 tons. Now, people won't have seen these because obviously the bridge hasn't swung for 30 odd years, but these huge portcullis style gates would lower down,
come down vertically
at a rate of, I think it said, it would take 15 seconds or something to bring them down.
How dramatic.
Yeah,
I love
and
it.
each of them had 12 bright red lamps
Mm-hmm.
on them as well. So when these things were down and lit, you wouldn't.
So if
be
you were
missing.
going over there at night or something, or if it was poor conditions, you'd see them.
Exactly. Now, the swing span, which was actually the longest in Europe at the time, lots of Scottish bridges have got international records for a time when they were built, haven't they? Erskine had one only a few weeks ago when we were talking about that, and Kingston had one, and
There's kind of a uniqueness about them that gives them that. Yeah.
And the Forth Road Bridge, I think, was as well for a time. So, anyway, the swing span weighs 1,600 tons, so it's quite heavy, as you can imagine. And its mechanism was basically intended to be electrically powered, and there's 2 50 horsepower DC motors in place that allows it to swing. There was a backup diesel generator available in case of any power failures.
So it was plugged in basically to the grid,
yes,
but had these generators in there in case something happened to the supply, they could still open the bridge.
Now, the swing span it was quite a feat of mechanical engineering at that time. Very, very well engineered. It had to, because it all had to come together nicely. And of course, if you've got a nicely machined mechanism, it's much more efficient to use and to open and maintain and look after. So they're very proud of the fact that there was elements of it that were machined to within like a 1,000th of an inch or
something,
that kind of detail. It's all in that technical paper. Basically, at the push of a button, the turning mechanism was quickly brought into action. The rollers located beneath the structure were machined, as I say, to very high accuracy, and this enabled the opening of the bridge to be completed in only a few minutes.
Which is what you want,
yeah.
So you don't have huge queues at this thing and ships waiting.
Exactly, yeah. And I think it was said that initially the entire process, up from them being made aware that a ship was wanting to pass to the road completely reopening, was somewhere in the region of 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. But in later years, as they had refined the process and they were well trained, they actually managed to get it down to about 11 minutes. So that's not too bad. Yeah. It's not too bad. Of course, traffic in those days would be much lighter as well. So you wouldn't have the same issues, with the swing bridges.
Then again, it was still only, though, one crossing over the Forth, so you'd want to be able to get that that nailed. Yep.
Now, some people might wonder, well, how did this bridge get held in position when it wasn't open or rotating? What was to stop it swinging open? Well,
in the wind.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very windy location, as you say. And basically, to lock the bridge in place, there was some hydraulically operated locking bolts. So basically, they would push a button and these bolts would retract. Mm-hmm. And then the brakes would be released, and then they would follow a whole procedure that would allow the bridge to go through its opening. Mm-hmm. And it could turn 360 degrees. And apparently every Sunday morning for years they used to rotate it a full 360 degrees so that there was an even wear on all components.
That's such a cool fact. Yeah. I like that because the fact you said it was 360 degrees, I imagine almost like this lazy Susan of a bridge, like that you would just swing it round just to do that.
Yeah.
And then I suppose, obviously it had to sit back in the right position, but that totally makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
I mean, it says here, the design for the control room and an engine room was also quite innovative because it was all contained within that cylindrical centre span.
Yes, that's right. So the engine room's below.
Engine room's below?
Yeah, and the control room's obviously above.
Above, yeah. We'll talk a bit more about that.
Oh, don't worry, I wasn't going to steal your thunder yet, so it's fine.
So, the thing about this bridge is there's so much to discuss, particularly in the design and construction. We just don't have the time here to go through it all. So one of the things I'm hoping to do is to make some additional reading available in the new web article, where people can actually go away and really read the in-depth technical information on this bridge.
See it all in one place.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, what we're giving you here is basically just a summary.
But it's very cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm learning a couple of things here. I did not know that.
I didn't know most of this.
360-degree turning.
I didn't know most of this either. A lot of this was news to me. Okay. Any questions on the design?
No, not so far.
I think it did say that other options were considered and discounted. I mean, at the time, they were kind of limited with the forms of construction that were available to them. So they probably had to go with steel girders and trusses and that sort of thing. But anyway, construction was finally underway in December of 1933 and actually was completed less than 3 years later in October of 1936. So just,
But quite a technical and complicated thing that for the time, that's not bad.
No, I didn't think so either.
Yeah.
I thought that was quite good. At its peak, the site employed more than 200 men. And one of the things they were particularly proud of was the fact that there were no major accidents recorded during the construction. Now, at the time, that was probably quite unusual because we've heard of nasty accidents in some of the big projects like Clyde Tunnel, Forth Road Bridge.
Back before kind of the health and safety culture that we have now and the control over these things.
Yeah.
Then again, guys were maybe working at extreme heights, or in these conditions. It might have been a factor in that.
Yeah, exactly. Interestingly, the initial works obviously involved piling, for the new supports and the like. But they actually built two temporary timber bridges, spanning out across the river from each shore, with a channel in the middle to allow shipping to continue. And on top of these two timber bridges were railway tracks. So there was two standard gauge tracks on top of each of these bridges, one for cranes and plant, the other for wagons. So basically, as they were spanning it across the river and they were digging the casings and the like for the foundations and for the reinforced concrete supports, they were obviously excavating material. So they would grab that out of the river, dump it in the wagons that were on this timber bridge, and then the wagons would be drawn off and then onto the railway and taken away from site.
It's better than having barges sitting there, I suppose, clogging the whole thing up when you're still trying to get ships through. Yeah. So when you say this is a bridge, I suppose it kind of approached from either side, and you say with a gap in the middle to that.
So it was like a proper timber bridge. They had some steel joists, according to the paper. Some of the timber sections were particularly huge. I think it was like a foot square, some of the timber sections they were using, because the Forth is quite fast flowing. You'll be aware from the number of times we've been there, the tidal range is quite large there as well.
Yeah, it is.
It changes very quickly as well. So they were conscious of that, and they knew that these bridges were going to have to last potentially up to 3 years, so they were fairly robust. I thought it was quite interesting, the fact that it had these tracks on it, and there's a couple of photos online, which sadly, I think the one that we're going to show, we've licensed a few images to show from Historic Environment Scotland, and I think you might just about see the tracks, but there are a couple of others online that have much better views of the tracks, and I will provide a link to that, the local Kincardine history page. I recommend that one.
Look forward to seeing these.
Yeah. Okay, so these two timber bridges were built out. They were completed by 1935. Okay, which obviously as they were extending it across the river, that was taking a bit of time. There was one incident where a steamer ship collided overnight with one of these bridges and caused considerable damage. I think it said it was the one that was coming out from the south shore, and that actually caused a 3-month delay to the project because it all had to be rebuilt. But that was the only major incident, I believe, during the construction of the bridge. That was ultimately had to be replaced. And as they spanned out, of course, across the river, then the deck was getting put in place. They could remove, parts of the timber bridge below.
Because they had, the bridge they were building to help them build the bridge they were building.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, construction of the reinforced concrete piers at the north shore involved the use of casings. As I said, now casings, to people who don't know, are basically big steel cylinders that are put down into the water to hold the water out as they then excavate the soil.
You put the casing in and you take the water out of it, so you have a dry place to work.
Yeah, and you then basically pump it full of concrete and reinforcement and various other things to build up to level, and then your support gets built on the top of that.
And then when you're done, you let the water back in.
Yeah, exactly. Now, it did say that they had some issues with water ingress to some of these casings, and they had to change the mechanism that was involved, and eventually they switched to a system with sealed cylinders and compressed air. So they were basically using compressed air to hold the water out, which can be quite dangerous, as we've learned from the Clyde Tunnel.
Reverse vacuum,
Yeah. So that apparently worked much better for them, and that allowed progress to continue. That permanent timber jetty that we were talking about earlier, that was completed in the autumn of 1935. And as I mentioned, preempted myself a bit, that was a Canadian Douglas fir. Now, more than 4,000 tonnes of steel and 150,000 rivets were used in the construction of the bridge. And the steelwork, as normal for the time, and even some of the later motorway bridges, was supplied to the site by Sir William Arrol and Company of Glasgow.
Yeah, familiar with them.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that was all shipped in by rail and then moved by crane out to the position. Now, some of the larger girders had to be delivered in sections and bolted together on site, because some of them were 150 feet long, I believe. So they broke them down into 50-foot sections. So there you go. Interesting stuff. The swing span was completed in mid-1936 and was a fine example of both structural and mechanical engineering. It was erected in the open position to maintain shipping channels, and it was finished at a very high standard. Believe it or not, a trial erection of this swing span was actually undertaken at the fabrication yard prior to its transportation to site to make sure it could all
They dry
together.
fitted it. They've done it all together.
So when it came to site, it was actually quite easy to
we
put
know
it up.
this is going to work.
Yeah. Exactly. I thought that was quite interesting, actually. Headroom travelling through the bridge, so anyone who's driven through there will know that there's headroom of 18 feet. So that's well above the 16 feet 6 minimum that we see elsewhere on the network. Now, I mentioned those two concrete portals at either end of the swing span. They were adorned, or they are still adorned, with the coats of arms of Stirlingshire, Fife and Clackmannanshire, and the name of the bridge is displayed in bronze lettering. Each portal, as we mentioned, is fitted with those gates, which were lowered to keep traffic off the swing span. And they basically did have an ornamental finish. They're finished to a very high standard. And in some of the photos that we share on the web article, you'll be able to see those gates in the lowered position. I'm sure that'd be nice.
It'd be good. It says here in your notes they weighed 4 ton each.
Yeah, 4 ton each. Yeah. Which is quite substantial. Yeah.
Amazing.
Now, the bridge control room.
The good bit. Yes.
It's a lovely control room.
Yes.
So
let's consider this. When we think of control rooms for bridges and other pieces of infrastructure, it's some building remote to it. The control room is on the bridge.
Yes. It's
where it is quite hard, and it's actually not very obvious. How
many people do you think have driven over that bridge? Not realised. Yeah.
I used to, because I've driven over Kincardine prior to having to work with it.
Yeah.
And I never knew that was up there.
Absolutely the same.
No one
never realised it was there. So it's 30 feet, 10 metres above the road in the mid-span of the swing span.
Yeah.
So next time you're driving, look up, you'll see some windows and various things up there, that big box. That's the control room.
Yes. Now, it's important to note, just before you go on, I said remote buildings, CCTV was not a thing back then. So the control room being there completely makes sense, because they had a perfect view of the entire situation.
Fantastic viewpoint of the entire bridge and the river.
Now, I mean, we have kind of regional control centres that are hundreds of miles away from whatever they're controlling. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, we've both been in that control room.
We have.
It's stunning.
It's wood panelled and everything, if I remembered, and teak. Yeah, we're just getting to that, and a total time capsule. Yeah,
maintained in such a way as part of the listing of the bridge, and as part of the agreement when it closed. It's almost been retained as a museum, as a monument to the original.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, when we were in there, because we had to go in and inspect and look at these things. It's very secure and stuff. But there's still newspapers in there and everything from like when the days that the guys worked in there, with these lovely portraits of the bridge masters.
Yeah, it's really quite something.
I've never been anything like it in when working with infrastructure. I've never seen anything like that.
I'm not one for that kind of either. Me, I'm all mostly post-war, but
60s, 70s.
Yeah, I found it very interesting.
I loved it.
Yeah. And there will be a photograph or two of the control room on the web article as well. So hopefully people will have a look at that. And there are some available online of it as it looked when it opened as well. You can see plenty of those online. So, and the finish even of some of the control panels is fabulous.
It's lovely.
Yeah, it really is. Now, even then, when the bridge opened, they knew that it was 24-hour operation, 7 days a week. Shipping was coming and going constantly, so that the control room had to be manned constantly. And that dictated, really, that it had to have good facilities. So they provided a mess, facilities for the staff. There was lavatory provision, fresh running water, hot water. Again, we've seen it. There's a kitchen.
Yeah, there's a cooker and everything in there. Yep.
Yep. It was all, pretty good to work in. Very well insulated as well, because of course it'd be quite windy up there, quite cold. It could be a while between ships coming, so you might want to, you want to be comfortable.
Yep.
Yeah. So control room was there. Probably one of the earliest examples of an on-site control room on a bridge in Scotland.
I always loved it, the fact that they had these binoculars up there. And I kind of pictured these guys sitting up there kind of looking off in the distance and looking, and also I suppose for maybe managing any incidents that happened on the bridge, that happened. So.
Believe it or not, there is a photograph on the Scran website, which is part of Historic Environment Scotland, of one of the bridge staff with those binoculars looking downstream to a ship.
Just the very thing, probably the very binoculars I had to look through.
Will be. Of course it will be, yeah. It's so much history.
It is.
It really is.
Great.
But anyway, we're still talking about the construction here. So, I said operators were given an uninterrupted view of the bridge through the use of large windows on all sides of the control room, which everyone will now notice as they're driving over. And the bridge was provided with ornamental lamp standards. The street lighting out there is really nice. And, it was converted to LED recently in a very sympathetic way. So it still has its original look.
It's rather than just taking them down and putting up standard kind of aluminium columns or something.
So it's 20-inch diameter Morocco glass globes.
Is that what they're called?
Yep. And similarly, there were ornamental lighting standards and columns on the jetty as well, on both sides of them, although I believe there's only a few left.
So, have we been missing a trick here, Stuart? Should we have ornamental lighting on our motorways?
Why not? Why not?
Sections, big cast iron things, yeah.
Some of us consider high mast lighting to be ornamental.
It is, yeah. It's very functional. Yeah, it is.
Profiled parapet railings were installed and are still in place, and all steel work was painted to a very high finish.
Yeah.
And originally they used to touch up the paint every year.
Oh, right, okay.
There you go.
I did not know that, to be honest with you. Well, given the size of the bridge, I wouldn't have thought it would have been every single year. Because I know with some of the larger structures, painting is a continuous exercise.
Which is probably what they were doing. So it was section 1 this year, section 2 the next year, and then they would do all that on a rota, wouldn't they? Just like
It's lasted well. I mean, I found when we had a look round it all the time as part of these inspections, it was in reasonable nick in these parts that you were talking about, which is really good. A testament to how well it was built,
to the quality
and
of it,
how well it was maintained.
Oh, most definitely, yeah. And I'm going to mention the maintenance in just a second, funnily enough, because we can't go through a podcast without talking about the maintenance and who looks after things.
Remind me of work, yeah.
Approach roads. Construction of the approach roads was completed fairly well in advance of the bridge opening. The traffic, as you imagine, they're usually the easy bits.
Yep.
To do in the south, a new single carriageway linking to the existing Grangemouth Stirling route was constructed. Today, this forms part of the A985 and the M876. In the north, a new section of road linking the bridge to the Dunfermline Alloa Road was constructed, and a bypass of Kincardine town centre was also constructed. As I mentioned earlier, that is known, or would be known now as, I believe it's Ferrygate. The bridge was open to traffic on the afternoon, 12 noon apparently, on the 29th of October 1936 by the convener.
Strange time to open a bridge.
Yeah, the stroke of noon, it says in the paper.
Strange.
Yeah.
Okay. Normally it's the morning or night. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was by the conveners of Fife, Stirlingshire and Clackmannanshire. It was immediately popular, and within a week was being used by more than 1,200 vehicles a day. Now, in 1936, that was a lot of traffic.
They probably think, rush hour.
Yeah.
1,200 a day, that's what you probably get on some single-track roads,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was very popular. That is more or less the construction. But let's talk a wee bit about its operation over the years, okay? At its peak, the bridge swung open more than 50 times a month. Okay? So, more than one a day.
Yeah, I was going to say it works out about a couple of times a day. Yeah.
A process that could take up to 20 minutes to complete, as I mentioned earlier. Although they did say they managed to get that down to 11 minutes, I think, in some cases. By the 1970s and 80s, this opening of the bridge resulted in congestion because there were many more vehicles on the road, and slowing everything down to a halt for 10 to 20 minutes created queues. And apparently there were more than a few irate drivers at that time.
Of course, I mean, that kind of delays. But we all know what it's like being stuck at a level crossing.
Yeah, it's kind of similar, isn't it? It's like one of those level crossings where you're sitting and sitting and sitting, and there's not just one train, there's two.
The only thing was, though, I've always thought about this, is that only for a certain time until, 1964, when, that other bridge...
Yes, that's a good point. Mentioned on one of the articles that I was reading, I think it was a newspaper article, one of the Alloa newspapers. It did say that traffic did drop off quite a bit in 64
because
when the
we know the
bridge
Forth opened.
Yeah. Although Kincardine then immediately became the backup route if Forth had to close for weather reasons.
Yeah.
So it kind of it almost had a new role as a backup thereafter, but still very well used by local traffic.
I was going to say, it is for that look. Also access to the A985 and these kind of things.
And it was mentioned in another article that I read actually that it remained the route of choice for a lot of people going from Glasgow to like Fife and even Perth, St Andrews, because you would go basically up the A80, the A876, cut across through Falkirk, over the Kincardine Bridge, and then up that A road, goes up through Crooked Devon, up to Kinross.
Yeah.
And that would then bring you out
to
the
A91.
I think it
I
takes
don't know.
you up to the
I
A91,
haven't got my phone, so...
And eventually you end up up at Kinross, near the
That's
A91.
probably the way I would go.
Yeah.
Even if I was coming from Glasgow and go that way, or I'd probably go along the A985.
Now, nowadays you would get pushed across the Clacks Bridge if you were doing that manoeuvre. Yeah. And then I think that's part of the A977 or whatever it is, So it was always well used by people. Now, let's talk about the bridge masters first. So in the period from 1936 to 1988, there were 4 bridge masters of Kincardine. The first was Mr. James Boyd, who I mentioned earlier, who later received his British Empire Medal in the control room. The third, Mr. George Reid, actually worked on the bridge for more than 40 years.
Okay.
Yeah, there was one final chap who was there only for a couple of years before they decided to take the operation away, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute.
So there was only really 3 bridge masters.
Yeah. What was interesting to me, and I hadn't appreciated this before, the bridge masters at Kincardine were not only responsible for Kincardine, they had responsibility for 7 or 8 other bridges across Scotland. Other swing bridges.
Okay, right.
So a couple of examples here that I've included. So in Shannon, so they were responsible for the one down at Renfrew. And then the Benavi, is it Benavi Swing Bridge on the A82 as well?
Is that way up near...
towards Inverness, I think.
Is it Fort Augustus?
Is it Fort Augustus?
Or something like that, because I came across this when I was doing the North Coast 500, and I decided to come down that way, and there was a bridge
there's a few swing bridges
up
there, and so they were all responsible for them. And also another one, and I need to do a bit more digging in this, and this shows perhaps our ignorance with some of these things, but also made reference to Castle Carey Bridge in Stirlingshire. Now, Castle Carey to me is at the Arches. I wonder if did that old canal bridge lift, or was there one near there that lifted?
Possibly.
Somebody will know, and they'll be able to tell us.
Yes.
So that was interesting.
I can't reach Google from here. But
So these guys were responsible for
all
various
these
bridges across.
What? So does that mean
Scotland.
that they weren't there every day, or
Well,
they kind of went around to different sites?
Yeah, it implied that there were obviously some staff for each of these bridges, but the guys in charge had responsibility for more than just
Kincardine
one.
was seen as the main one.
Yeah, it was the control. It was the centre for all the swing bridges. It's mentioned in one of the historic, articles.
So they speak on the telephone. Places.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Any questions on that?
No, not so far. I mean, it's all interesting though.
Yeah. Okay. So by the 1980s, we weren't really shipping grain upstream to Alloa, and we weren't really taking petrol by ship either. And the need for that access for big ships really was declining. Not only that, the bridge was becoming a bit outdated in terms of its internal electrics and components. And they reached the stage where they were going to have to either modernise the bridge and give it a full refurbishment or close it. And the decision was made after a public inquiry to close the bridge permanently.
And that was it.
That was basically it. Now, there was
alternate reality.
There was some outcry. It didn't go through easily. I think the Scottish office did have a wee bit of a fight in its hands. As I say, it went to public inquiry. Ultimately, it was decided that, there really was no justification for this bridge to continue to open. And that said, they didn't just close it one day and say, okay, well, that's us. They did have a few events to mark the occasion. And the last day that it opened was actually on Sunday, the 31st of January, 1988. Now, I was kind of annoyed to see that some people online have said that it was November 1987, but it wasn't. I wonder if perhaps November 87 was maybe the last time that a ship went through.
Yeah, and then they just opened it again as a kind of ceremonial thing.
So on that Sunday, the 31st of January, that was like the celebration day. Now, there's a great video of this on YouTube. So if you search Kincardine Bridge opening on YouTube, you'll see that. Now, I'm going to put a link to that on the new web article as well, so people can actually watch that.
I think I've seen said video. We're going on about. I'd love to see it with my own eyes. Was it never opened again purely for a maintenance? Let's check and see kind of if this would still work.
No. So they closed it in January '88, and thanks to Donald Stirling, one of our followers, who's a keen photographer, we actually have some great photos from that day, and Donald has shared some of those. We're going to share them in the web article.
Great.
Stunning photos. I'm going to show them to you after we finished recording this, because I know you'll appreciate them.
I will. I'm too busy reading the notes when I came over here for what was going to be said. I haven't had a chance to look at these photos.
So throughout 1989, basically the work to lock the bridge in position was undertaken. They decided, as I say, they would maintain, they would retain the original features as they were, and they would keep it almost as a museum, as a monument to what was there before. And that's the position that we're in 30 odd years later. Yeah. So the bridge is there. Now, it was stated that throughout the 70s and 80s, the responsibility for some of those other bridges that they originally had was gradually passed to the various regional councils. Okay. So by the time Kincardine was closed, they were no longer responsible for other bridges across the country.
So, like, for example, the one in Inchinnan, Renfrew, that would have gone to Strathclyde Regional Council.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It did say as well that of the staff who were left at that time, some of them went to Central Regional Council, some retired, and some were made redundant. Or it said some accepted redundancy, so I assume on a voluntary basis. And by 1989, that was it. It's never opened since. And someone on Twitter or Facebook asked if the bridge, or they assumed the bridge had opened during the construction of Clackmannanshire. No, it didn't. The bridge.
Why would it do that? To get materials there or something?
The bridge cannot open now.
Yeah, this was a question.
Yeah.
I actually had. I mean, what would it take to get that bridge working again? And I think it would probably be a lot more than a few cans of WD-40.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even the expansion joint system and all the things on the bridge deck, there's been a lot of changes made there. Yeah. It would not just be a case of turning up and flipping a few switches and getting that bridge to open. Okay, the original engine room and stuff is all still in place, but it's obsolete.
Yeah. It's not been maintained to the level to keep it running. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So you would, the bridge is never opening again.
So sad. It is in a way. It is. There's a sadness to that. So,
a few final lines that I had prepared. Basically, the bridge remains an important link in the trunk road network today. Particularly, that was realised when the Forth Road Bridge had to close for emergency works a few years ago.
It came to the rescue, didn't it? 2015.
Exactly, and even recently, when the Queensferry crossing has had to close for some issues as well, Kincardine's still there, providing it back up.
Yeah.
Good old Kincardine.
Good old Kincardine.
Yeah. I have nothing else to say. I think that's more than enough.
I think it's been one of the most educating kind of topics, refreshing that we've had in a while. To be honest with you, but thank you for researching it. We do have a few questions if we've got time.
Yeah.
That people have sent in, and we can talk about those ones.
It's one of these things. You'll know because we do a lot of research. Mm-hmm. Either when you start digging into something, you find nothing, and you have to make some assumptions, or you find so much that you could never possibly share all of it. And Kincardine's been one of those cases where you just could not share all of it.
Isn't it?
So, as I say, I'll put links to the other articles on the bridge on the webpage and have a look. And there's so much detail available out there in the construction process, even in the opening sequence for the bridge. It's described line by line in great detail, and how it all came together. Fascinating read. I recommend it.
That's it. So when are we doing Clacks?
Do people talk about that bridge? I don't know. It's an interesting bridge. That is an interesting bridge. It's another one of these interesting ones that I believe originally, if you go back to the 90s, that was originally going to be a replacement for Kincardine.
Yes.
Rather than a sister bridge.
I've never really wondered what it does. I sometimes thought, yes, it's a replacement, but it does slightly do a different function. It goes in a slightly different direction.
Yeah, at some point they obviously made a decision that rather than replace Kincardine, they would build an additional bridge that would deal with a proportion of the traffic that went in a certain direction. So traffic, as we mentioned, any of that traffic, Glasgow to Fife, St Andrews, Dundee even, Perth, you go over Clacks and you go north. Similarly, if you're going to Alloa and you're coming up from Glasgow, you probably cross Clacks, turn left at the end. If you're going to Dunfermline, Kirkcaldy, and you're coming up from Glasgow and you've decided to go that way, you would cross Kincardine and then take the A985 all the way out to junction 1A, 2?
The
M90?
It's it's now 1C.
1C.
1C. It's changed that many times. So it's junction 1 Admiralty. It's
Admiralty.
Called, and 1C. Yeah.
And then you could join the M9 there and then take the A92 or whatever. So it still has a fairly important role. Now, that was something we were supposed to mention. Was that when Clacks came along, they amended a lot of the road network. Now, I remember driving up there over Kincardine one Saturday afternoon and getting caught in traffic going through Kincardine town centre. Mm-hmm. So they bypassed Kincardine again to the south.
That's
when
right.
Clacks got built.
That's the 2+1 road.
Yeah.
With the overtaking lanes. So
yeah.
That's really useful. That.
So traffic crossing the Kincardine Bridge now actually doesn't need to go through Kincardine town centre. Because I guess probably tens of thousands of vehicles a day were using the bridge by the time Clacks came along. Because it's still a very busy bridge.
Yeah.
Actually, I wish I had looked up the traffic flows, but it must be single carriageway, so its capacity is kind of limited, but it must be more than 10,000 a day, I would think.
I think so.
Yeah.
When we visited, we found it quite busy.
Oh, it's always busy.
Even that, there was plenty of things thundering over it, you know, which necessitated these inspections somewhat. But it's
a busy old bridge, an interesting one. Something that I've come to respect a bit more than I maybe did a few years ago, because it was not a motorway bridge, and
it was, in a way, Stuart. I was kind of like, this is something we got to do. But also, it had this kind of historical aspect to it, which I know you said you liked a lot of the kind of post-war stuff. Yeah. But no, I did appreciate it for those things.
So, conscious of time, so you better ask me some of these questions.
Right. Well, this question can be answered immediately. Okay. So this one is Lewis Dorman, who I think this has come through on Twitter. Asks, why did they decommission the rotating portion, and would they ever recommission it? Well, you covered this and said it was outdated, and no, they wouldn't.
Yes.
To be honest, because it's been basically held now in place, and all the stuff that's with it, expansion joints, as you say, it wouldn't work.
No.
Okay, here's an interesting question.
Okay.
This is from David Ochart, who said, it's said that the bridge is haunted.
Haunted by whom? The ghosts of former operatives who
worked there. Or things that might have happened, or did you hear anything about this?
We don't like focusing on the awful things so much, but I believe there was one incident where a truck or a car crashed through the railings and ended up in the river, and the body was found 2-3 weeks later.
Okay.
That's the only nasty thing that I read about. As I was going through.
I've never heard that it's haunted, and we went there for over a year.
I don't remember seeing any ghosts.
I don't remember seeing any ghosts,
no.
And I didn't get that vibe about it. You know what I mean? It's like I never put that down in the inspections. Oh yeah, there was a phantom out there between spans 4 and 5, and I think
maybe seeing ghosts there would be more like when someone sweeping the road actually. But yeah,
it's very difficult to sweep because of that barrier. You see. No, I've not heard anything about it being haunted, and like I said, I never seen anything there. But you never know. This isn't Coast to Coast FM, so we'll move on to the next one.
Yep.
I'm just looking down here. It's somebody, as you said. I'm just looking at these aren't really kind of questions, just some interactions I'm finding quite humorous actually, but I'll skip over that.
I'm going to mention that in a minute, so ask me the question first and then I'll talk about the interactions below.
Okay, well I don't actually have, somebody does see it, says, when was the last time it was opened? But,
so that was the January 1988, so when we ask people for questions on the podcast, on social media, we ask people to do that so that we can answer them on the podcast. We don't expect Mrs. Know-It-All and Mr. Know-It-Everything to jump in and answer the questions looking at you, Duncan McKnight.
Well, I was just going to say, the guy who's actually answered this works for us.
Exactly.
Or works with us.
Yeah.
Duncan, so we'll tell you what, we'll wait for his next podcast, right? And we'll get everyone to answer his questions.
Exactly.
When he's going on about the A90 or some corner of the land. Yeah, okay, no problem. I get that, but that's all the questions people have in it.
Yeah.
As always with these things, if you've got any interesting stories about it, or you've got any follow-up questions, ask us. or anything you might challenge us on. We can bring that up in another one.
Another one of our followers got in touch to say they had visited the Kincardine History Centre or Museum or whatever it was, and there's a model of the bridge in there. That's worth looking at. I think it might have been Jonathan. So thanks for giving us a wee tip on that.
It was a museum.
Neither did I, but then we're not really local to there.
Yeah,
you know,
I suppose.
So that's apparently there, so worth checking out. I might do that myself at some point.
It's a good way to spend a Sunday.
Yeah, and if you've got any photos or anything, always, let us know as well.
Yeah, okay.
Now, I think you've got something you want to tell us all about supporters.
Yes, of course. As always, I just want to thank Eastford Excavations for continuing to support us for the second time, because these contributions, they ensure that we can continue to do these things. And it's great. And we also want to say thanks to HBS, who also support us, Highway Barrier Solutions.
We appreciate that, and thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks to everyone else who snapped up booklets and badges over the last few months as well. Hope you're enjoying them. Hope you like them. And the quality is
some of the results of this, of course, being with this support is some of the equipment we've now been able to get for podcasts and also for digitising. You have also managed to now almost completely digitising all the mapping.
Yeah.
Which has been an incredibly difficult, expensive thing, because they don't fit in any commercial scanner, do they?
No, they do not, and it is a very expensive process. All of our large plans and folded drawings are now scanned.
And they're starting to appear on the website.
Yes, they are. So thank you to all of our wonderful followers for that. That's helped us immensely. Yeah. There's a calendar coming again soon.
Of course there is.
Another wall calendar.
I didn't think that would need mentioned because it's been such a tradition. But yes.
We have an interesting concept this year. I'm not going to give it away.
Okay. You better not be starting the week with Sundays.
Well.
That's always a controversial thing with a calendar. But okay, that's fine.
So that's coming. That'll be coming in the next few weeks. Price the same as last year, $9.99. It's not going to change. We are cheap here at the Glasgow Motorway Archive. So yeah, keep an eye open for that. As always, you can listen to all these podcasts on all good podcast providers. There's way too many to mention these days. I googled the Glasgow Motorway Archive podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I think there was like 25 different possible options came up.
Oh, okay.
Google, Amazon, iTunes.
The usual Spotify. You're probably listening to it on
Podbean, YouTube. They're all there. Yeah.
And we've also got, of course, we mention this all the time, we're all over social media as well.
All over it.
We're the only... Well, we've got Facebook, we've got Twitter, we've got Instagram.
Yes.
The only thing we don't do is TikTok.
No. I don't quite fancy seeing you dancing up and down on a bridge.
Up to some squeaky music.
To some squeaky music. Tell me how wonderful it is.
One day, maybe the next generation of people after us might do that. But no, we are on YouTube as well, aren't we?
We are. We have some videos on there. There's been some other social media groups recently have posted some roads-related material, questionable quality.
Oh dear.
You stick with us for the best. We make no...
Do you know what I will say? We're all trying, we're all learning, Stuart. If we cast our minds back to the Ayrshire podcast, we came in with there's just so much stuff we still don't know here, and then the stuff came flooding in. So we're all trying. Thank you very much for listening, as always.
Yes. Yep.
So
we'll see you next month. Tell us what we're covering next month. I know people like that.
It's a very, very, very cool Odyssey, I'm going to call it, that I was on. This was the North Coast 500. So I'd done this actually earlier in the month, and I can't wait to tell people about it because I went on some fantastic roads. I've seen some brilliant bridges, and I've managed to do all of this, and I didn't even bump into Duncan McKnight. So there you go.
Good. That's always a good thing.
No, I was very, very busy, and so is he. So we'll talk all about that.
Well, I look forward to hearing all about that.
Yep.
It's an interesting route, so I'm sure people will appreciate it. If you've got any questions on it, you can let us know in the usual place. But we'll see you next month.
Yep.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.